There is a lot that could be said about the latest military escalation in Israel, including the media such as the ABC and BBC reporting this escalation and indeed the whole conflict as if it was all Israel's fault, always mentioning the casualty scoreboard as if it was a basketball game. Then there's the US administration, which, despite the incessant flood of rockets coming into Israel from Gaza, has decided to still proceed with millions of dollars of aid to the Palestinians. And then there's the disgraceful statement from the Australian National Imams Council, containing all the usual cliches such as heinous crime, theft of Palestinian land, and disregard of international law, blah, blah, blah. But we expect all this, so it shouldn't come as any surprise. But what was surprising was the statement put out by the Australian government and reiterated by Foreign Affairs Minister Marise Payne. Now, Foreign Affairs is historically a high-profile portfolio, or so you would think. But in the few years that Marise Payne has held the job in the Morrison government, can anyone recall a single word uttered about Israel? Until now, that is. Only she didn't really talk about Israel as such, an ally of Australia, mind you. Instead, she just muttered some general comments that could have been about two kids fighting in the sandpit. Look at what she said. Quote, "The Australian government is deeply concerned by the escalating violence in Israel, Gaza and the West Bank, and unequivocally calls on all leaders to take immediate steps to halt violence, maintain restraint and restore calm." She goes on to talk about refraining from unilateral actions that destabilise peace, returning to genuine peace negotiations, and then there's that old chestnut, not fuelling the cycle of violence. So let's cut to the chase. Is Australia an ally of Israel or not? Because if it is, then I would have expected something a lot more substantial in terms of support, especially in the face of this contrived and pre-planned escalation of violence by the Palestinian Arabs. When people use this neutral language, it presents as a position of moral equivalence that, let's be honest, completely misrepresents the truth. It's simply not good enough to make these wishy-washy, sit-on-the-fence statements when there is so clearly one side instigating the violence, that would be Hamas and the PA, and the other side simply defending its citizens as it has every right to do. This nonsense came from the Foreign Minister, but presumably Prime Minister Morrison would have been consulted at some point. So I am saying the same thing to him. Not good enough, mate. Hamas is designated as a terrorist organisation under Australian law. And if you can't differentiate between right and wrong on such an obvious issue, what does that say about your commitment to Australian values? You know, the ones held by all those quiet Australians who voted for you. There is no both sides need to de-escalate the fighting here. A lawfully constituted country is under military attack from a hostile neighbour, and this is precisely when friends are expected to stand up and be counted. Now, to be fair, the Morrison government has been generally as supportive of Israel as any Australian government has been over the last 50 years. It is certainly better than any potential Labor government might be, but then that's not hard to beat. Morrison recently announced that Australia would not be attending the 20th anniversary of the infamous Durban conference later this year, which is good, but that was easy to do. It was all upside and there was no risk. People want to see their politicians believe in something, and if the current government wanted to declare support for Israel, then they needed to do so unambiguously, knowing that there would be the inevitable loud response from the anti-Semites. But the Morrison government took the easy way out in this case, and it showed. In politics, trying to have a bet each way simply doesn't work, and it never has. This is Alan Friedman for the Australian Jewish Association.